Hello, and welcome to Keeping It Real with Shannon Live. Because you don't know how it's going to turn out.
My kids empowered me to get out.
What's going on with this remote learning and in the midst of COVID?
Working for different elected officials, learning and understanding how to put the community first.
Hello, and welcome to Keeping It Real with Shannon. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Hello, ladies. Hello, well, good. Well, last week we kind of talked about feeling the holiday depression because around the holidays, some people start feeling depressed, and we want to continue that conversation because of things that happen around the holiday. We always lose a lot of loved ones, starting around before Thanksgiving to after the New Year's, and we wanted to invite on a special guest tonight who's very knowledgeable of this topic. Let's talk grief. And so we're going to have Dr. Vanessa to introduce our special guest tonight.
Hi, welcome. Our special guest tonight is Reverend Asim L.F. Shannon. He's the founder and servant leader of Our Day Insights Ministries in Queens, New York. He's a certified grief recovery specialist and a certified grief educator. Let's welcome our guest tonight, Reverend Shannon.
Well, hello there, Reverend Shannon.
Good evening.
How are you?
Good evening. I'm in a space with all these ladies with my same last name, and I'm just meeting them.
I told you might be our relative.
It's a possibility.
I'll do the investigation. I'll investigate.
Oh yeah, that's our detective there. Yeah, right. But
thank y'all so much for having me.
Yes.
Thank you for coming. I'm so happy to have you to come on. As we were saying earlier that around this time of the year, I don't know what it is, but we lose a lot of loved ones around this time of year, started before Thanksgiving and until after the New Year's. And it just takes a toll on you when that happens because you find yourself almost in some kind of grief or grieving during the whole holiday season. So we want to talk to you tonight, about handling grief. When something happens to us, we all handle it in different ways, I know. And, we all go through some certain changes, but maybe you can kind of give us some comfort in how, we should handle grief when it happens to us.
Well, I think what needs to happen first and foremost is we need to have a clear definition of what grief is, what unresolved grief is, and then look at some ways in which we can handle that process. First and foremost, grief is probably the most intense human emotion that we will experience. And when you think about it, what is grief? Grief is, as I've learned, through my certifications, and one being with the Institute of Grief Recovery, is that grief is the normal and natural reaction to loss. And I think we have to really keep in mind that when we experience a loss, all the things that come along with the emotion of grief, the sadness, the isolation, and all the other plethora of feelings, that's normal and it's natural. Unfortunately, we live in a world that treats grief and people who are grieving as if it's something that's abnormal or unnatural. And what I've discovered is that happens because people really don't know how to hold space for people who are actually in grief. And when I say hold space, what I mean by that is just being able to be present with someone and they're not feeling good. Oftentimes we are with people or it's easier to be with people when they're feeling good and when they're not feeling good, because it makes people around them uncomfortable. We often try to shift the narrative. We want to change the situation. And what happens in that moment is the moment you and I cause someone or try to help someone to feel different in the midst of their sadness, what we're actually saying to them is, I don't know how to be with you where you are. And this makes me feel uncomfortable. So let me do something to allow myself to feel more comfortable. And what that does, in essence, is it really does not support the person where they are. So what is
Well, I think I'm not cutting you off, Shannon, but I think that also comes from. I think it's just like this human nature. When something happens to someone, your first instinct is to, put your arm around them and talk to them, and try to ease their comfort, try to ease their hurt. Just talking to them in the sense like it's gonna be all right. We know it's gonna be all right, but at that present time, you're not listening to. Truthfully, I can just speak for myself. You're not hearing anything anybody's telling you, even though they're telling you it's going to be all right. Okay, we know what happened. In your head, it's like you don't know what happened, and you don't know how I feel.
So
And
you
know what I'm saying?
you just proved the point that I was
Yeah.
making. The point that I was making is to be present with them where they are, because you don't know how they're feeling. You don't know what they're experiencing. So the goal is to be present with them, to hear where they are. Even if they are not saying anything, can you sit in silence with them? Because like you just said, they're really not hearing anything that you're saying. So why do we feel the need to have to say anything? Sometimes your presence and just your silence gives them permission to be where they are.
I
And
think
that is
think
the
that's
challenge.
I think that's very important, right? Because sometimes can we say, is it safe to say everything will be okay when you don't really know the circumstance as a grief? And my thing is, does grief come at different stages? Is grief different for different ages? Or are there different cultural ways of how people deal with grief? I think sometimes people may overstep boundaries out of not understanding if it's a culture difference, will things be okay? Well, you can't really guarantee that. So
Absolutely.
how do you deal with that? Silence, I would say, it would be best way. Maybe a hug, may even be something outside of a cultural response to grief.
Sometimes the easiest thing to do is to ask a person, how can I support you?
Absolutely.
And if they don't have an answer for it, let that be okay. You can just say, how can I support you? If they don't have an answer, you can also say things like, well, even if you don't have an answer, I'm just going to be here with you. And when you do come up with an answer, I will be here to support you. Because see, here's the thing. Even though I may be certified as a grief educator and certified as a grief recovery specialist, I'm not the expert on grief. Do you know who the expert on grief is?
Who?
The person that's grieving. The
What
person
you
that's
say?
grieving.
You say that the person is grieving that's expert, but sometimes when you're even the person that's grieving, it's hard for you to even deal with your emotions yourself.
Absolutely.
So, how can you help that person when they don't even know what to do?
Just by being present. Just by being present and allow them to stay present with what it is that they are present to. Because there are so many different emotions that people can experience, sometimes people just need, well, let me put it this way. One of the things that we learned in the grief education certification is that all grief needs to be witnessed. And what does that mean? When you are witnessing someone in grief, you're exercising the power to help them feel safe, seen, and supported. That validates two things. It validates for them that the person that they lost, their life had value. And then that also validates the fact that they are in this experience of grief and you are there to support them. That also validates them. So when we're witnessing people in grief, we're helping them to feel safe, seen, and supported. People won't show or allow themselves to be in a place of vulnerability if they don't feel safe.
But
And
you
so
know
the
when
question then becomes, how do you help people to feel safe? If I can give you a definition of safety, a definition that I heard of safety is the absence of threat in the presence of connection.
Mhm.
So when people feel like there is no threat to their vulnerability, then they're going to feel safe, and they're going to feel safe enough to be in their experience with you.
Yeah. But you know, Rev, when something first happens, I'm talking just for myself again. When something like that first happened, you're in such shock when it happened to you, not even thinking about the grief at that moment, because you were just in shock that you can't believe that happened. That
You're not
person is
thinking about
gone.
it because you're in it. You don't have
Yeah,
to think about it.
yeah.
You're in it.
But
You're
no, what
in
I'm
it.
trying to say is like the grief part of the grieving didn't hit you yet, because it's like you're still in shock. Like I say, it doesn't hit. Well, it didn't hit me like right away. It hit me later,
Mhm.
later when everything was quiet and it was just me. I never felt nothing at the beginning because I was still in shock. I was busy preparing, so nothing really hit me then until
Right.
afterwards. It hit
Well,
me.
Lottie, that may be an individual basis, right? And wax the Reverend, like suppose you got a parent that's grieving a loss of a parent, but then again, how do you grieve and support and console the child who has also had a connection with that grandparent? So in other words, how does the griever support another griever?
Well, that's where it gets kind of complicated, and it also gets murky, because oftentimes when you have a parent, in the scenario that you just raised, you have someone that loses a parent, and then that child also has lost a grandparent. And a lot of times what happens is people have a tendency to compare grief. You can't compare someone's loss, because all loss is impactful to everyone who's experiencing it. It just comes in different degrees based upon the relationship. And if I had time to walk through, like what unresolved grief looks like, it'll give you a better picture of what I'm expressing. So when you talk about grief being the normal and natural reaction to loss, when you go to the places of unresolved grief is almost always about things that we wish we could have done or said better, different, or more.
Oh, that's
Unresolved.
unresolved grief.
So in order, so this is why it has to be contextualized, because once you hear it, then you can bring your own story into it. I think
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to be right back with more of Let's Talk Grief. We'll be right back.
It's Shannon. It's Shannon.
They say there are no excuses.
They say to just push harder.
They say to just go faster.
But when we're on the field, they don't know what's going on inside us.
How hard is too hard?
When do we get support?
When do we raise our hand and ask for help? We need each other.
Love. Your mind.
Hi, we're back with our topic, Let's Talk Grief, or with our special guest, Reverend Shannon. Reverend Shannon, I wanted to ask you about when you are grieving in a situation, like when you lose someone, but it's kind of been a while, not a long time or anything like that. Is there such thing? Okay, this is what happened to me. I mean, it could sound crazy, but I truly believe it was. It was like when my mother died, right? One day, because she lived upstairs from me, right? So I always would put the broom and the rake behind her door. So I was outside cleaning the yard. I came in, I put the broom behind her door, and all of a sudden I hear this voice calling me. She was calling me by my nickname. And I was so scared. I was too scared to turn around, right? And it was like all of a sudden I just turned around and it looked like I saw her standing at the top of the steps. And I was so scared. I just ran in the house and closed the door. So I didn't know like what is happening here, because you can't tell me that wasn't her voice talking to me, because I hear it just as plain as anything when she called my name, and I know this can't be true. I mean, am I like so deep into grief that I actually thought I heard a voice, or what's happening during that time?
It's like Dr. Vanessa said, everyone's experience is their own unique experience. And so I'm not going to say that what you experienced was real or not real. It was real for you. And the reality is people have all kinds of experiences when it comes to grief. My father died in 2012. 4 years after his death, I was driving from Harlem and I said, I need to call my dad. And I had to pull over on the side of the road and I broke down. This was 4 years after my father had died. And that's what inspired me to become a grief recovery specialist, because I wanted to be able to have some tools to help myself to navigate that process. So everyone's experience is unique. There's a book entitled The Grieving Brain. And in that book, it talks about what the brain actually goes through when a person is experiencing grief. So what you talked about is a way that is kind of described in the grieving brain, because the reality is our brains help us to navigate through spaces in our homes in the dark, because our brain records that. Right. And so can you imagine, like, say, for instance, you're walking in your house and the lights are off, but you're not bumping into anything because your brain has kind of recorded those things. And so one day you're in the dark and you come to the place where, the couch is, and you normally would brush up against the couch, but now this time you don't. And it's like, oh my God, something's missing. And so now your brain has to now make another adjustment to the fact that this thing that was once there is no longer there. And now the brain, the beauty of the brain is that it also is a problem solver. So now you have to solve the problem of this space that's now missing. Right. And again, also what Dr. Vanessa said, across different cultures, people grieve differently. In certain cultures, people understand that you have to grieve in community. A lot of times we want to isolate ourselves, but healing actually only happens in community. So your experience is your unique experience. And someone who, so if I was working with you and you told me that as your experience, I would support that experience because it's yours. I wouldn't try to make it right or wrong because it's your unique experience. And but
how does someone, do you have any tips or advice to someone who is trying to deal with their emotions? What can they do to help them through the grieving process? Without, some people end up going into depression because they can't cope with what's going on with their loss.
Right. Well, it all depends on the magnitude of the grief that someone is experiencing. Sometimes you have to seek professional help. Other times it's good to journal. It's good to actually write out how you're actually feeling. Sometimes it's good to just have someone that's there where you can actually express those feelings. because one of the things that I say often is in this process, it's really important to always honor your truth, because when you honor your truth, you create space for people to support you where you are. And what I mean by that also is we have a tendency to, because we don't feel safe, when people say, well, how are you doing? A lot of people will say, I'm okay.
Right.
And one of the things that I offer to people is this, because I don't want to take away your okay. So I'll suggest to them, well, as opposed to just saying I'm okay, try this on and see if it fits. Say I'm okay, that I'm not okay.
Right. I want like sometimes through life, right? This is a journey. Right? Journey is different pathways for different people. We only look at the living things that are living, things that are in the moment. Some may be intentional, some may not be intentional. Do you recommend that throughout the process that people talk about death and loss?
Absolutely.
For they can come to an understanding that things are not always forever. And sometimes things die, even if it's like a plant or animal, some kind of loss. That I think the conversation should be. I know people don't like to talk about death because it's just something more.
They don't want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about it.
But I think just the idea of talking about a loss of something kind of help people get through that process when it becomes more of a reality.
No, I think, I have conversations around death all the time. And I think the more that you engage in that as a part of life, not saying that it's going to make it any easier when it happens, because your process is still going to be your process. But the fact of the matter is you are in some way, shape, or form prepared for this as a reality that is going to transpire.
Absolutely.
And so again, because the topic is so broad, there is a whole lot that you just can't get in the small amount of time that we have. But if I can offer anything, it is definitely to make sure that you have people who know how to hold space for you, people who are there with you in loving support, people who are there who are not trying to shift or change where you are, but they are supporting you right where you are. That is extremely important, that you do not isolate yourself, that you have an idea of what it is that you need. And one of the things that I want to offer, and I share this a lot when I work with people, is learning how to create sacred memory. So someone asked the question, why do we grieve? And the response was, we grieve because love is looking for a place to land. And so when we create sacred memory, we create a space for our love to land and our pain to heal. Can I give you two quick examples if I have time? The first one is every year on my father's birthday and the anniversary of his death, I buy a white candle. I light that candle. I have a conversation with my father, and I allow that candle to burn until it burns out. Because every day I come home, it reminds me of the memory of my father, because memory holds story. Right. Memory holds story. Yes. Second example was my grandfather. My grandfather, a Southerner, I used to love to watch him make grits with sliced tomatoes, black pepper, and butter, and white bread. And he used to eat that, and it made it look like it was such a wonderful meal. So one day, my grandfather's spirit was on me. What did I do? I went into the kitchen. I made some grits, put some butter on it, sliced tomatoes with black pepper, and I ate the meal in honor of my grandfather. Right. That's how you can create sacred memory, and there are no limits to that. And you can have those conversations. You can say things that you did not get a chance to say while the person was living. But one of the key things, and this is what I mean by it's so hard because there's so many layers to this. But one of the key things in terms of healing in your grief is recognizing the things that you may have to forgive the person for, because that is an essential part of your healing. Because no relationships are perfect.
No, they're not. But I tell you, what you said about talking about that person is really, really helpful. You know, when you talk about that person, about some of the things, the good times that you had together. I mean, even the bad times or whatever, but just keep it. It's almost like keeping them alive by talking about them. And I found that to be very, very helpful.
Well,
And
that's
the other
one thing
thing
that I say is the only way that a person ever truly dies is if they are forgotten.
Exactly.
For sure.
Exactly. And I know another thing that Hope B is, I did a lot of praying, asking God to take that burden off my heart. Just lift that burden off my heart. And I did that every day. And then after a while, it was like, it just lifted off me. And I could do what I needed to do and carry on and stuff like that. Because you got to be doing a lot of praying at that time.
And that's a factor that comes into the process. And that is, if you have a spiritual practice, then you also incorporate that in your grieving process.
Yes, because he'll lift it now. He'll lift it. I can say he can lift it now. Everybody else can talk with themselves. But I know that's what got me through, is because I know that he can do what needs to be done.
And you learn to live through it as well.
Exactly.
You never get over it. You just learn to live with it day by day.
You know, you can go on, because like you're walking around crying every day, you know, after a while it just gets to you. But then when that burden is lifted up off you, where you can carry on, but yet and still you can talk about it, you know, it's a big relief. It's a big relief, you know. And look, our time went by so fast, and everything we have to talk. You're gonna have to come back and do a part 2 for us.
Well, that's fine. I would love to, because like I said, it's so much information that I would like to give to you, and then you can also put your personal experiences into the information that you get. So,
well, we thank you so much for coming on and joining us, and we thank everybody for joining us. And you can watch us every Saturday at 5:30 on Brick Arcs Media and 2:30 on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. So thank you again for joining us. And as always, we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Today's show is sponsored by Abu's Bakery. If you have a sweet tooth, stop by Abu's Bakery for some delicious cakes and pies.
Would you like beautiful pictures for your home or your office? Then stop by Fake Art Gallery. They have a large selection of pictures from around the world.
It's Shanna.